The voice trembled, barely more than a whisper. I never thought it would come to this. How did I let myself fall into a nightmare I couldn't wake from? The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint crackle of a distant storm. The question hung in the air, chilling and unyielding. Do you know what I did? It wasn't just fear, it was the fracture, the moment where innocence slipped through trembling fingers. The shadows lengthened as memories clawed their way back, raw and relentless. Every breath was a confession. Every heartbeat, a guilty drum echoing through the hollow inside. The soul's fracture wasn't loud, but it was deep, unfixable, permanent. The trembling voice spoke again. I didn't just witness it. I was dragged into it. I was tricked. There was no turning back from that truth. The weight of silence suffocated as the storm's anger matched the turmoil inside. He couldn't hide the truth behind his eyes. The weight of that night clung to him like wet clothes, cold, suffocating, impossible to shake off. Every shadow whispered secrets he wished he never heard. I walked into a world I didn't understand, he confessed. A place where silence was currency and betrayal was the price. His voice cracked with a sorrow that wasn't just regret but pure fear. The air thickened around him, pressing in like the walls of a prison. He remembered the faces, strangers with smiles that hid knives, promises that tasted like poison. I was told it was a game, he said, a dark auction where fate was a commodity. But he didn't see the trap until it was too late. I was tricked into bidding on a life, not knowing whose, not knowing the cost. The truth clawed its way out, raw and unyielding. The memory came like a jagged blade, sharp, unrelenting. He recalled the cold basement, the hum of unseen machines, the murmur of voices masked in lies. They told me to choose, he said, to place a bid I couldn't refuse. His fingers trembled as he spoke of the screen that displayed faces, none familiar, all haunting. It was a sick auction for a person's life. The highest bidder won. But I didn't know I was bidding on a death sentence. The room seemed to close in tighter with every word. His confession spilled like a broken dam, hopelessness and horror entwined. I was trapped in a nightmare, sold pieces of my soul with every passing second. No one warned him about the cost. No whispered caution. No hint of the darkness lurking behind the auction's glitz. I thought it was just a twisted game, he admitted. But the truth was far worse. The weight of betrayal crushed him deeper than the cold chains that bound the auction's victims. He remembered the silence, thick, heavy, suffocating, like the final breath before the fall. I realized then that I was no longer a bystander, he said quietly. I was complicit. I had become part of the horror I tried to escape. His voice broke under the weight of his own admission, the room echoing with a silent verdict. The fracture had formed. There was no going back. The moment the soul slips is the moment the self shatters. I can never undo what's done, he whispered. I was tricked. I was forced. And now, every breath is a reminder of that night. The room, once safe, felt like a cage. Shadows no longer hid but revealed the truth too terrible to bear. If I could scream, I would. If I could run, I would. But I'm trapped here, in this endless silence. His confession hung in the air, raw and unyielding, marking the end of innocence and the beginning of a nightmare he could never escape. He sits in silence, not as a man ready to speak, but as one burdened by memories too heavy to share. The room feels vast, yet his world has shrunk to a quiet corner where sorrow dwells. No names, no faces, just the weight of absence pressing down. His pain is not explained but worn like a second skin, raw and undeniable. He does not plead for sympathy, nor does he seek forgiveness. Instead, his presence demands recognition, a silent invitation to witness the damage left behind. Time has not healed. It has hardened the spaces between his heartbeats. The air around him hums with unspoken grief. In this stillness we do not see a man broken, but a soul waiting to be understood without words. The ache is palpable, An echo of loss felt deeply before the story unfolds. The silence between moments is deafening. It is in this quiet that his truth lives, unspoken but heavy. No introductions, no explanations, only the raw, jagged edges of a soul in pain. His breath catches as memories flicker like broken film, brief flashes of joy, terror, and betrayal. Each thought pulls him deeper into a labyrinth of loneliness. He does not cry out, but the absence of sound is its own scream. The room holds him gently, an unwilling witness to his unraveling. His eyes stare past the walls, searching for something lost long ago. The ache is so profound it transcends words, leaving only the hollow space where hope once lived. This is the moment before revelation, before the past claws its way to the surface. Without a word, he shifts slightly, the faintest movement revealing a flicker of life beneath the weight of his grief. His hands tremble, fingers tracing invisible patterns on the empty tabletop. The room is heavy with absence, the air thick and still. Outside, the world moves on, indifferent to his pain. His chest rises and falls unevenly, a quiet rhythm of survival. In the stillness, there is no denial, only acceptance of a life irrevocably changed. The past lingers like a shadow at the edge of the light, refusing to be forgotten. He is alone, but not invisible, a presence defined by the silence he carries. This moment is not about who he was, but who he has become. A man marked by loss, waiting for the story to be told. He does not reach for words, for they betray the depth of what he feels. Instead, he lets the silence speak, a language of emptiness and longing. The absence of explanation becomes its own testament, louder than any confession. His gaze drifts downward, reflecting the weight of unseen scars. Memories play like flickering shadows behind his eyes, fragmenting into images too painful to hold. Yet, within this quiet, there is a fragile thread of resilience, a whisper of strength beneath the ruin. He is here, broken but breathing, a silent survivor of something too dark to name. We sit beside him, not to fix but to feel, to bear witness, to recognize the human cost hidden in the spaces between words. Time folds in on itself as he remains still, caught between what was and what cannot be undone. There are no answers here, only the echo of what's lost reverberating through the quiet room. His breath is shallow, steady but fragile, like the flickering flame of a candle in a storm. He carries a story untold, a wound invisible, but raw. The world beyond these walls continues unaware, while he sits rooted in the aftermath. There is no relief, no comfort, only the slow, aching recognition that some truths demand a price too high to pay. This silence is not empty. It is the space where pain resides, waiting for the courage to speak. And in that waiting, we understand the gravity of a soul forever changed. Shame settled over him like a suffocating fog, creeping silently through every corner of his mind. It wasn't just the terrible acts he had been forced to witness, but the unbearable truth of what he had become, a participant in a nightmare he never chose. Betrayal pierced deeper than any wound, not only from those around him but from his own misguided trust, misplaced and broken. He tried to speak the words that clawed at his throat, but they remained trapped, swallowed by a suffocating silence that tightened like cold chains. Every attempt to escape his memory dragged him deeper into a shadowed abyss he desperately wished to avoid. The walls of his small, cramped room seemed to close in tighter, the air thick with invisible accusations. Faces, some familiar, others unknown, blurred into one haunting reminder of the heavy price paid. This isn't just circumstance, he thought bitterly, it's personal. The crushing weight of guilt and self-loathing bore down with every pulse of his weary heart, and the cold silence seemed endless. Restlessness consumed him as he paced the narrow hallway, each step echoing hollowly against cracked walls stained with years of neglect. The silence felt oppressive, growing heavier with every breath he took. "Why didn't I run?" he whispered to the empty air, a question unanswered and haunting. His chest tightened, breath coming in shallow, rapid bursts, an unvoiced scream trapped inside his ribcage. The faces of those he had trusted came crashing back, their smiles now masks hiding cruelty and deceit. Friends, or what he thought were friends, had vanished when the truth demanded bravery. Alone and ensnared in a web woven from lies and fear, he felt a cold sting of betrayal cutting deepest where trust had once lived. His reflection fractured in a cracked mirror, a ghostly image of a man worn thin by shame, eyes hollow and desperate, searching fruitlessly for any sliver of escape. Doors slammed shut around him, and with each one, hope dimmed further, suffocated by an unyielding silence that promised no relief. Silence pressed down with crushing weight, suffocating him until his thoughts unraveled into a chaotic storm. Each memory was like a jagged scar cutting deep, every secret a heavy burden too vast to bear alone. He fought to break free, but the past clung with a relentless grip, suffocating and merciless. His heart thundered with a volatile mix of fear and rage at the cruel deception that ensnared him, fear of what he had become in this twisted game. Though the room was still, his mind was deafening, screaming, with the voices of betrayal and overwhelming regret. Trapped not just by circumstance but by his own gnawing guilt, he felt each breath stolen, every moment a losing battle against the dark tides pulling him under. How did I end up here? He wondered with bitter disbelief. And is there any way to escape the nightmare I'm trapped inside? Every attempt to break free only pushed him deeper into the suffocating nightmare. Doors slammed shut like thunder, windows locked tight as if the very walls conspired to trap him in a prison of silence and fear. The past loomed like a shadow, impossible to outrun or face head-on. Each breath carried the bitter sting of betrayal, a poison seeping through his veins. His mind replayed the moment truth crashed down, the instant trust shattered, and silence became a form of complicity. The unbearable weight pressed on his spirit, wearing it thin but not breaking it entirely. Still he was caught, tangled in a web spun by faces he never suspected, pulled into darkness he never wanted to enter. Despite the crushing despair, a flicker of resistance remained, a quiet but fierce fight to cling to the last shards of himself amidst the wreckage. Shame and silence had become his relentless companions, unforgiving and constant. He no longer recognized the man reflected in the cracked mirror, someone worn thin by choices made in fear and secrets kept in desperation. His voice, once clear, was now a faint whisper lost to the void, swallowed by an endless darkness. Yet, buried deep beneath the suffocating silence, a fragile spark of defiance flickered stubbornly, a tiny flame refusing to be extinguished. The battle was no longer just external, but waged fiercely within, a war to reclaim fragments of a fractured self. His fists clenched tightly, knuckles whitening under the strain, the pain raw but undeniably real. This struggle was no longer about escape, it was about survival. Though the walls might close in and shadows loom, he vowed to fight for every breath, every word, every moment of life that remained beyond the darkness. The truth crashed into him with the force of a hurricane, tearing apart every fragile illusion he had clung to for so long. Nothing was as it seemed, every story he had believed, every face he trusted, dissolved into a web of lies. She was never missing, he breathed, disbelief and horror wrestling in his voice like a bitter poison. His memories fragmented, no longer fitting the narrative he'd held onto. What he had thought was a mystery was instead a carefully constructed lie, orchestrated by unseen hands. The betrayal cut deeper than before, for now he knew it was not only others who deceived him, but also himself, blinded or complicit. The safe story, the one that allowed him to survive the nightmare, was nothing but a lie, a fragile facade shattered by harsh light. The revelation tore through his soul, unraveling years of silence, fear, and self-deception. The question now burned like acid: who had woven this cruel deception? And why? The man staggered under the weight of this newfound knowledge, teetering on the edge of a truth far more dangerous than ignorance. He replayed the moments leading up to this shattering revelation, whispered words, furtive glances, the pregnant silence filled with unspoken secrets. I didn't lose her, he confessed, voice cracking under the burden of truth. I gave her away. Those words hit him harder than any blow. He realized now he had been complicit, not merely a victim or a bystander, but a participant in a betrayal more profound than he ever imagined. Faces that had once been strangers blurred into conspirators hiding behind smiles and polite lies. The nightmare had become a living reality, one from which he could no longer turn away. The lie had been safer than the truth, a cage he had chosen to inhabit, but no longer. This revelation was a curse, yet also a key, unlocking a new path, demanding a courage he wasn't sure he could summon. The room felt smaller, the air heavier, as the man wrestled with the devastating weight of responsibility and regret. With every new piece fitting into the puzzle, the story he had trusted unraveled completely. Faces once familiar took on sinister masks, their true intentions buried beneath layers of deceit. The comfort of ignorance was shattered, replaced by a brutal clarity that pierced through every lie. He saw now that this twisted game had many players, each hiding behind masks of friendship and trust. The silence he had sought as protection had only concealed the poison, the betrayal echoing louder with each secret uncovered. "I was not a victim," he admitted bitterly, voice hollow, "but a pawn in a game I never understood." The truth felt like a knife twisted deep into his chest, but amid the pain, it sparked a flicker of resolve. If the darkness was this thick, so too must be the fire he needed to fight, to expose the cruelty and reclaim the remnants of his shattered self before it was lost entirely. He confronted the terrible weight of his own betrayal, the silence that had bound him in chains of complicity. "I was a participant, not just a witness," he said through clenched teeth, voice shaking with quiet fury. The walls that had once contained his fear now echoed with his anger, fierce and unrelenting. Every lie told to him had a name, and every name carried the heavy burden of guilt. He wrestled with the suffocating realization that his own hands had unknowingly signed the contracts of horror. Yet in this darkness, he found a fierce spark, a raw, unyielding desire to rip through the shadows, to expose the cruelty hidden behind friendly faces. The story was no longer about hiding but about revealing. No longer could he carry the silence. His voice must break the quiet, no matter the cost. His fury was a weapon, sharpened by pain and a thirst for justice. The truth demanded reckoning, and reckoning came with a cost that felt impossible to bear. He now understood that exposing the lie would exact a steep price, perhaps one too high to pay. Justice was no longer a comforting concept, but a hollow echo in an empty room. Peace might come, but it would arrive wrapped in ruin and loss, a bitter and fragile reward. The cost was everything he once held dear: trust, innocence, and the fragile remnants of self-worth he desperately clung to. Yet in this moment of brutal clarity, he embraced the ruin as necessary, the shattered remains of his former life, the soil from which a new truth might grow. The silence was broken, but the scars remained, a permanent reminder of what was lost and what must never be forgotten. "The truth is my burden now," he said quietly, voice steady but weighted, "and I will carry it alone." The story ended not with victory, but with knowing the price paid, the losses endured, and the unforgivable wounds that time would never heal. The moment of reckoning came suddenly, shattering the fragile calm like glass breaking on stone. His voice, once locked in silence, erupted with a rawness born of years of buried pain. "I was terrified to speak," he said, "but silence killed me slowly." The confrontation was unavoidable now. Shadows that had lurked in corners were dragged into harsh light. His fury burned through the lies and deception, stripping away the masks people wore to hide their guilt. No longer could he hold back the scream lodged deep within. Something sacred, trust, innocence, self-worth, was sacrificed on the altar of truth. The room echoed with broken words, desperate confessions, and the shattering of long-held illusions. In that crucible, honesty, painful and fierce, was all that survived. He screamed words he had never dared to utter, releasing years of fear and shame in one fierce eruption. "Why did you betray me?" he demanded, voice breaking and trembling. The silence answered with stony faces and cold eyes. The confrontation was a storm of raw emotion, accusations flying like daggers. The fragile trust that once bound them shattered irrevocably, scattering into shards too sharp to touch. Yet beneath the chaos, a brutal honesty took root. A truth so searing it scorched the wounds, but also laid bare what could never be undone. This moment was a crucible, where innocence died and something brutally real was born. The fight was no longer hidden. It was raw, exposed, and unavoidable. The confrontation tore at the fragile fabric of their past, unraveling secrets stitched tight by fear and silence. The walls themselves seemed to pulse with the weight of betrayal and broken promises. Every word spoken was a shard of glass cutting through years of denial. He felt his own self-worth crumble as he faced the raw truth, stripped bare and vulnerable. Yet amid the ruin, a fierce resolve ignited. This was not the end but a beginning, a painful rebirth forged in the fire of confrontation. He would no longer be a silent victim, but a warrior claiming his voice, no matter how bruised and battered. The truth, no matter how devastating, had to live, and so would he. In the heat of confrontation, something sacred was lost, perhaps forever. Trust, once fragile and precious, lay shattered. Innocence, too, was sacrificed beneath the weight of harsh truths. Yet from this devastation, a grim clarity emerged. He understood now that pain was the price of honesty, that the cost of survival was to let go of what could never return. His scream gave way to silence, a silence filled not with relief, but with a hollow ache. This was the crucible's aftermath, a ruinous peace where nothing could be undone, but something honest, raw and unbreakable remained. The battle was won, but the war was far from over. The climax was not a moment of victory but of brutal knowing. He breathed deeply, the weight of what was lost pressing on his chest. There was no triumphant relief, only the cold clarity of what had been sacrificed. The shattered trust, the innocence destroyed, the self-worth stripped bare, all lay in ruins. Yet in that ruin, he found the fragile seed of peace, earned at a devastating cost. The silence that followed was heavy, filled with the echoes of screams that could never be fully voiced. He stood alone in the aftermath, knowing that some wounds would never heal, and some betrayals never forgiven. But he had spoken the truth, and in that found a fragile salvation. The story ended not with victory, but with the knowing of what was lost, what was survived, and what could never be undone. The aftermath was not a soft landing but a cold, unforgiving clarity. Justice arrived, but it felt hollow, earned through pain, yet lacking the sweetness of victory. The man faced the ruin of what once was, a landscape scarred by truth and betrayal. The weight of consequence pressed heavily on his shoulders, a reminder that peace, if it came at all, would come at a price far higher than he had imagined. He no longer sought comfort but understanding, a brutal, unvarnished truth he could live with. The silence around him was no longer suffocating but heavy, with lessons learned and battles fought. He was left to reckon with what was lost, what remained, and what could never be restored. The cost of truth was immense, but the man had paid it in full, and now must carry that burden forward alone. Justice, once a distant hope, now felt like a fragile shadow cast across the wreckage. The man knew that the system had delivered its verdict, but it could not undo the damage, could not restore innocence stolen or silence broken. His heart was weighed down by the hollow triumph of retribution. Peace, if it existed, was a distant dream obscured by scars too deep to heal fully. The man's reflection in a cracked mirror was not one of victory but survival, a testament to the cost exacted by truth and the loneliness of bearing it. Every breath he took was a reminder that clarity had come, but at a price that left emptiness behind. In this space, he began to understand the true meaning of loss and the complicated nature of justice. The peace he found was not in forgetting, but in facing the ruins left behind. The man understood that healing was a slow, uneven journey, marked by moments of quiet acceptance and painful remembrance. The silence was no longer empty, but filled with the echoes of what could never be undone. In the wreckage of broken trust and shattered dreams, he glimpsed a fragile resilience, the will to carry on despite the cost. The shadows of the past lingered, but they no longer held absolute power. This peace came not with comfort, but with a clear-eyed acceptance of the price paid. The man, battered but unbroken, stepped into this new reality, knowing the scars would forever mark his path, but also that survival was a victory in itself. Justice had been served, but it left a hollow echo in its wake. The man had faced the worst truths, and lived to tell them, but the cost was clear in every line etched on his face, and every quiet breath he drew. The peace he earned felt fragile, perched precariously on the edge of ruin. Memories that once haunted, now became reminders of strength forged in fire. The man understood that the road ahead was uncertain, marked by loss and the burden of truth. Yet in that knowledge lay a hard-won clarity, a peace bought with sacrifice, honesty, and courage. There would be no easy redemption, no simple healing. Only the solemn understanding that some wounds, though raw, were a testament to survival. He carried the truth like a heavy stone, knowing it would never fully leave his hands. The scars it left were reminders of what was lost and what had been endured. The silence that followed was no longer a void but a space to breathe, to reflect, and to honor the cost of survival. Some wounds would never heal, some betrayals never forgiven. Yet in this quiet reckoning, the man found a fragile peace, a clarity born not of comfort, but of hard-earned knowledge. The story ended, not with celebration, but with understanding, the brutal cost of truth and the resilience needed to live with it. The man stood alone, knowing the path forward was his to walk, marked by what was lost and what was survived. The story reached its quiet conclusion, not with triumphant fanfare, but with a heavy breath that should never have been spoken. The man stood alone in the dimming light, the weight of all he had lost settling deep in his chest. No victory awaited him here, only the cold, unyielding knowledge of what was taken and what survived. His eyes, weary yet unbroken, reflected the ruins of trust and innocence forever gone. He had carried the unbearable truth to the end, paying a price too high for peace or forgiveness. The silence stretched between what was and what would never be, a chasm filled with memories too painful to voice. This final moment was not about endings, but about the fragile thread of survival that clung stubbornly to the wreckage of a broken past. He exhaled slowly, the sound almost swallowed by the heavy air. There was no celebration, only the stark clarity of survival amid loss. The scars left behind told a story no words could fully capture. Forgiveness was a distant shore he could not reach, and some wounds were carved too deep to ever heal. Yet beneath the pain, a fragile hope flickered, a quiet understanding that, despite everything, he remained. The past had taken much, but it had not taken everything. In that fragile knowledge lay a bitter strength, a resolve to face whatever came next with eyes wide open, carrying the truth as both burden and shield. The final breath was not victory, but acknowledgement, a silent vow that some things, though broken, endure. The silence after the storm was thick and heavy, filled with the ghosts of words never spoken and truths never fully told. He carried the burden of all that was lost, of trust shattered and innocence stolen. The loneliness was profound, but it was also a testament to survival, a reminder that even in ruin, something precious remained. His gaze drifted to the empty spaces around him, places where light once lived and shadows now reigned. The scars were not just wounds but maps of a journey forged in darkness and despair. Yet in that darkness he found a faint glimmer, a thread of resilience woven through the pain. The story did not end with healing or forgiveness, but with the knowledge that some wounds define us forever. He closed his eyes briefly, the weight of the past pressing like stone on his heart. Memories surged and receded, crashing over him like relentless tides. The cost of truth was etched in every line on his face, every tremble in his hands. There was no forgiveness here, only the raw acceptance of what could never be undone. The silence was a presence itself, a space where grief and strength intertwined. He knew some things would never be forgiven, never forgotten, but in that knowledge lay a fierce clarity. The past was a wound that would never close, but it was also the foundation on which he would build whatever life remained. He breathed in the cold air, steady and unyielding. The final line hung in the air like a breath held too long, an acknowledgement of what was lost and what endured. It was not a word of victory, but of knowing. Knowing the price paid, the battles survived, and the wounds that would never heal. He stood alone, the silent witness to a story carved in pain and survival. The truth had been spoken, but its echoes would linger forever. There was no forgiveness here, no final redemption, only the quiet strength of endurance. The story ended not with celebration, but with a breath that should never have been released, a solemn testament to what was sacrificed and what could never be reclaimed. And in that breath, the man found a fragile peace, fragile but real, carried forward into the uncertain future.